Hello, my name is Lauren Flowers, and I am currently in the second year of the MT program at the University of Toronto OISE, and I'm excited to be sharing with you my research over these past 2 years. What I decided to look at was how non-traditional sports within the physical education setting could help students develop global competencies. And through qualitative research, I specifically looked at the perspectives of Ontario high school physical education teachers. Literature suggests that sport education is valuable to the development of good social and moral character, in addition to actions of acceptance and inclusion. Current Ontario high school classrooms mirror the diverse populations of the province, and as a result, students have the opportunity to develop global competencies through daily interactions. My research study strives to understand if the integration of non-traditional sports into physical education could serve to further enhance students' development of global competencies. This research should serve to better equip PE teachers and all teachers to provide culturally relevant and diverse learning experiences for students. Social and cultural diversity has increasingly become a more prominent part of modern society, especially in North America, and due to the rising rates of immigration, North America is rapidly turning into a heterogeneous society, making the education system and our classrooms more and more diverse. And so, with this increase in diversity, it's important to ensure that our students are equipped with the knowledge, skills, and values that will allow them to live harmoniously and contribute to the heterogeneous society. And so, significant efforts have already been made to implement culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy in Ontario schools. However, physical education specifically is still lacking in diversity. PE is one of the subjects most dominated by white educators, and it's super important to make sure that we're providing this diversity to offset this imbalance. And so the purpose of this qualitative research study was to explore current teachers' perspectives and their perceived student perspectives on fostering students' global competencies in physical education through the teaching of non-traditional sports. My main research question was, how do high school PE teachers teach non-traditional sports to foster the development of global competencies in Ontario high school PE students? My three subsidiary questions were, what are PE teachers' perspectives on teaching traditional sports as a platform for developing global competencies? What are PE teachers' experiences with teaching non-traditional sports to foster the development of global competencies? And three, what are the challenges and opportunities PE teachers have encountered or perceive while teaching non-traditional sports? I underwent a qualitative research study in which I used semi-structured interviews via Zoom, which then was transcribed and analyzed. My participants were required to meet the sampling criteria, which meant that they needed to be qualified to teach in the intermediate senior physical education level. They must have a minimum of 3 years of teaching experience. They should have participated in or have experienced teaching non-traditional sports, and they should also be interested in the development of global competencies in students. The participants that were selected for this study were 2 physical education teachers who have 10 plus years of experience, in addition to both of them having experience as a physical education department head in publicly funded schools. Moving on to the findings of my study, there were 3 main themes or takeaways from the data. So first, it became apparent that there are inconsistencies in teachers' opinions on the impact non-traditional sports can have in fostering students' global competencies. One participant in particular, participant M, thought that they weren't really valuable or more meaningful than traditional sports, whereas participant A strongly believed that they had a role and they had impact for students. The next finding was that there were also inconsistencies in teachers' experiences with non-traditional sports, which directly affected their ability to implement them in their physical education practices. For example, participant A had underwent professional development series and participated in non-traditional sports themselves, and so they actively tried to include them in their teaching practices. Whereas participant M didn't enjoy them, didn't have much exposure to them, and as a result, didn't see their value and did not implement them in their own physical education programs. The last finding was that teachers believe efforts need to be made by teachers and department heads to expose educators and students to non-traditional sports. It became apparent that through exposure and experience with non-traditional sports, not only were students more interested, but teachers were more equipped and knowledgeable to implement them and continue to implement them throughout their teaching careers. To conclude my research study, I outlined some implications and recommendations for educators, for department heads, and for the general education system. So, although there are efforts being made to include more diverse perspectives in schools, it's imperative that physical education receives the same revision, referring to diversifying the physical education system. And so, I recommended that curriculum developers, school boards, department heads, and teachers need to actively try to incorporate new and diverse ways to educate students in the physical education realm. Also, future research into the lack of diversity in physical education programs could serve to be beneficial in addressing and resolving this issue. Furthermore, student interest and attention are key factors when it comes to implementing non-traditional sports, and it's recommended that teachers implement a student-centered approach while teaching non-traditional sports in their classrooms. Also, research into effective strategies for implementing non-traditional sports could serve beneficial in aiding teachers in their inclusion of non-traditional sports in their PE programs. Also, it became apparent that teachers who have more experience with or knowledge of non-traditional sports recognize the value they can provide and are more likely to implement them in their programs. So, it's recommended that teacher education programs incorporate non-traditional sports into the PE subject-specific courses, and also further research into the validity and the successfulness of physical education programs to successfully prepare teacher candidates to teach culturally responsive pedagogy and implement culturally responsive practices is necessary. Thank you for listening to my research presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you've been enlightened on the value that non-traditional sports can provide to the physical education setting.